Good afternoon, everybody. Today we'll be discussing human rights protection through consumer protection litigation, especially through the lens of the Little litigation in Germany. In our globalized economy, the issue of human rights breaches by corporations and accountability of them is of grave concern, resulting in a system of exploitation. This presentation will examine how consumer protection lawsuits can be an innovative means of addressing these violations. Currently, companies are held accountable to ensure ethical practices, safeguarding vulnerable people, and the advancement of sustainable development through standards such as the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights and their own due diligence legislation. However, consumers are increasingly conscious of their social implications of their purpose, enabling consumer protection litigation to be used as a tool to enforce corporate accountability, something we will get back to later. However, consumer protection litigation in the context of human rights refers to legal actions based on consumer protection laws to address corporate misconduct in their often global supply chains. This strategy targets false advertising claims about ethical practices or unethical practices themselves. A notable example of this is the Lidl case in Germany, where the company was forced to retract their claims about fair working conditions. This approach also creates a link between consumer rights in the global north and workers' rights in the global south, which hopefully influences corporate behavior through market pressures and legal risks in their often global supply chains. The role of civil society organizations is crucial, since they act as watchdogs and advocates in enforcing corporate accountability. Through adapting various strategies, including consumer protection litigation, but also transnational tort litigation and advocacy campaigns, consumer protection offers advantages such as easier establishment of legal standing and a focus on corporate statements and due diligence practices. But it also faces challenges, such as limited remedies for affected workers, the potential for companies to engage in the act of greenwashing. But despite these limitations, consumer protection litigation represents an innovative tool in the broader arsenal of strategies to hold corporations accountable for the impacts on global supply chains and human rights. And that brings us to the case that we're discussing today. We're all familiar with the supermarket chain Lidl, where they prize themselves on their non GMO projects, on their organic food, their fair trademarks, and just overall their human rights protection in their supply chains. However, these claims were disputed in the case Hamburg Consumer Protection Agency versus Lidl, where Lidl made the claim, "We trade fairly. We categorically oppose every form of child labor, as well as human rights and labor rights violations in our production facilities. We continually strive to ensure these standards." This is a claim revealed to be false. In studies done by the ECCHR and the CCC, it was found that Bangladeshi workers were exposed to unsafe and inhumane working conditions listed here, such as sexism in the workplace and excessive working hours, forcing Lidl to retract their statement and their membership from the BSCCI.
The legal case provides an illustration of how consumer protection laws can be used to mitigate human rights abuses by corporations. Although it is known that holding corporations accountable for human rights violation is a complicated thing, as they're not responsible for ensuring people's human rights, corporations are still one of the main actors when it comes to the abuse of fundamental rights. Consumer litigation provides an effective tool for holding them accountable. Likewise, the intersection between human rights and consumer law violations can be seen as the level of consumer protection lawsuits and the way that they unfold. So rather than attempting to hold a company liable for a particular act or omission that resulted in the human rights abuse in its supply chain, these lawsuits seek to prove that the company in question was aware of these abuses taking places in their business operations. The Corporate Legal Accountability Quarterly Bulletin serves as a crucial platform for analyzing significant legal developments affecting corporate accountability worldwide. In recent years, increasing scrutiny has been placed on the multinational corporations regarding their responsibilities in global supply chains, particularly concerning human rights and environmental standards. This edition highlights the ongoing legal litigation, which exemplifies how consumer protection laws can be leveraged to address corporate misconducts. Similar to the legal case, other high-profile litigation illustrate a growing trend of using legal frameworks to enforce corporate accountability across various jurisdictions, such as Nestle, the company in the United States, which was complicit in child labor practices within its supply chain. Consumers play a crucial role in holding corporations accountable for their practices, particularly regarding human rights and ethical standards. Their purchasing decisions can significantly influence corporate behavior. When consumers prioritize ethnically produced goods, they send a clear message to the companies about the importance of responsible sourcing and fair labor practices. This shift in consumer preferences encourages businesses to adapt more sustainable and humane practices to maintain market shares and their brand reputation. One of the notable examples of civil society influence is Who Made My Clothes campaign, initiated by Fashion Revolution. The global movement raises awareness about the ethical implications of clothing production and encourages consumers to inquire about the origins of their apparel. By mobilizing consumers to demand transparency from brands regarding their supply chains, the campaign has fostered a culture of accountability within the fashion industry. And it's empowering consumers through the NGOs and organizations by educating them and making them aware of the certain facts with advocacy and support as well, litigation assistance, and the collective action. The legal litigation represents a significant milestone in the enforcement of corporate accountability regarding human rights and ethical sourcing. The case, which centered on the allegation of human rights violation within legal supply chain. It resulted in both legal and corporate outcomes that were relevant in the retail industry. And the case led to a ruling that emphasized the necessity for corporations to ensure ethical practices within their supply chains. And following the litigation, Lidl undertook substantial reforms in the supply management, which included transparency and the implementation of the stricter auditing practices to monitor supplies for compliance with labor rights and safety standards. With regard to the main advantages of the consumer protection litigation, it is quick and relatively easy legal recourse compared to the traditional tort litigation. Duty of care does not need to be established over the affected persons, and the link between the harm caused by an abuse and a particular action or omission of the company does not need to be proven. One does not have to be directly affected in order to file a lawsuit. If one has purchased a product originating from the relevant supply chain, one can bring a lawsuit under the Consumer Protection Law. Consequently, it empowers consumers to take action because of the fact that there are less barriers that one must adhere to. That litigation strategy, however, bears its disadvantages. Consumer protection litigation is limited to consumer related issues, for instance, like misleading advertising or product quality, which limits the scope of applicability. It does not address deeper systemic human rights abuses across the supply chain. Generally, no redress is given for the people that are affected by the harm. And lastly, no liability is established for the harm caused by the corporation.
An alternative to consumer protection litigation is transnational tort litigation. Because the power of transnational corporations in international trade and commerce is continuously growing, with them already becoming as powerful as some states in this position, transnational tort litigation is used with its primary objective being attempting to create accountability for transnational corporations regarding their cross-border actions. The main advantages of transnational tort litigation include a comprehensive approach, meaning that unlike consumer protection litigation, it is not limited to consumer issues but also addresses a broad range of human rights. It is particularly effective in holding companies accountable for their direct and indirect involvement in human rights abuses. It has the ability to address systemic issues that exist within corporate supply chains, such as exploitative labor practices or unsafe working conditions. It can lead to widespread global changes in corporate behavior, and it often sets important legal precedents that can be used in future human rights cases. Of course, there are also some disadvantages that need to be taken into account when considering transnational tort litigation. It can often become an expensive and lengthy legal process, making it burdensome for the plaintiffs. A significant challenge in transnational tort litigation is successfully proving direct corporate involvement in human rights abuses or environmental harms in question. It also requires extremely detailed evidence to connect the harm to the company's actions. As these cases often involve multiple legal systems, it becomes challenging to establish and apply a consistent legal standard. It also becomes difficult to obtain evidence across borders in transnational litigation. Now, turning to some vital differences between the two litigations, consumer protection litigation only concerns consumer related issues, while transnational tort litigation covers a broad range of human rights violations. Furthermore, consumer protection litigation creates no liability for the harm that is caused by the corporation, while transnational tort litigation is actually able to create corporate accountability. However, consumer protection litigation is less expensive than transnational tort litigation, which can incur high legal costs. Consumer protection litigation also usually requires less time than transnational tort litigation. Lastly, consumer protection litigation does not demand a direct link between the harm caused and the action, while transnational tort litigation does hold these requirements. In short, consumer protection litigation is a less complicated litigation method. However, it is also less successful in enhancing liability and accountability for corporations, while the opposite is true for transnational tort litigation. To improve consumer litigation and strengthen corporate accountability, it is important to expand the litigation beyond only consumer specific issues to also cover labor rights and environmental impacts. It is also necessary to strengthen cross border legal frameworks for addressing multinational corporate misconduct, as it will ensure that corporations are held accountable, regardless of where they operate. An important improvement to consumer protection litigation would be to integrate human rights due diligence as part of corporate compliance requirements. Companies should be legally required to conduct regular assessments of their supply chains to ensure they are not contributing to human rights violations. Consumer protection litigation is also often financially inaccessible for many individuals, particularly those in disadvantaged communities. Improving access to affordable legal support, including offering government backed legal aid or NGO involvement, would enable more people to pursue cases against corporations that violate human rights. There are some important lessons to keep in mind from the legal case. For example, from the surface level, we can see the important achievements of companies now having to be transparent about their business practices and how they must avoid misleading claims about ethical practices or they will face legal consequences. Furthermore, the partnership between the Hamburg Consumer Protection Agency, the ECCHR, or NCCC demonstrates the value of collaboration between legal and advocacy groups. Future litigation can benefit from such collaborations, helping to expose unethical practices and pressuring companies to reform. Although the legal case was primarily about misleading advertising, it helped bring attention to systemic labor abuses in global supply chains. Even though consumer litigation usually addresses surface level issues like false advertising, these cases can spotlight deeper human rights concerns, raising public awareness and creating momentum for broader legal and regulatory changes. This case resulted in a consent decree where Lidl agreed to withdraw its misleading claims and change its advertising practices. While this was a victory for transparency, it also shows the limitations of such agreements in addressing systemic issues. Future litigation should aim for more comprehensive outcomes, including corporate accountability for supply chain abuses rather than just changes in marketing practices. To conclude this presentation, we have discussed the key issues surrounding the effects and impacts of corporations in respect to human rights in a wider application. To address accountability and responsibility of human rights abuses by such entities, consumer protection litigation acts as a useful tool by individuals or legal persons who feel it is necessary to direct responsibility. The legal case is an example of such cases where deceptive and false information by the company is challenged through such means. In this way, civil society and consumers plays a vital role in shaping the legal perspective and an understanding of how accountability is applied to corporations. In addition, while consumer protection litigation aims to provide a simple and effective way to address accountability, it still has notable advantages and disadvantages as compared to transnational tort litigation that provides a more successful yet complex alternative to address such issues. On behalf of the members of our group, we thank you for your attention to this presentation.